Welcome, good to have you with me again. And we've reached Psalm 11 in our ponderings in the Psalms. And it's a wonderful psalm full of assurance, but also a psalm that speaks assurance into the very harsh realities of life. I think it's particularly well known for verse 3. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? So you have a picture here of the righteous, David particularly, who wrote the psalm, looking at the world around in all its wickedness and evil, all its oppression and opposition of the people of God. And he hears, as it were, the taunts of the wicked. What are you going to do? The enemy are loading the arrows to the arrows to their bows. They're ready to shoot at you in the dark as well as in the daytime. What are you going to do? Maybe the best thing to do is the advice of the wicked, and perhaps even of our souls at times, is to flee like a bird to your mountain. Verse 2. The idea being there that the bird who's in danger would fly to the mountains because that's where the forests and the trees are, certainly in Middle Eastern days. And so that's a place of safety. So maybe what we're being told here is if the world is as bad as that, let's just opt out. Let's flee. Let's run away from the situation of trouble. But David says that's not the way to do it. I want you to notice, this is so important, I want you to notice David's answer. He says, when we're aware of things being like this, when morality is being undermined, when evil laws are being passed, when evil is unchecked and promoted, when there are attacks on the people of God, which are increasing, when everything around us is giving way, when the very foundations are shaking and moving, as I believe we would see them doing so today, what can the righteous do? Well, David says there are two things to do. Number one, look up. Look up. Don't flee. Don't look to the mountains. Look up, because God, Yahweh, is in his holy temple. Now be sure David is not thinking about the temple in Jerusalem, because when David wrote this psalm there was no temple in Jerusalem. David is looking to the heavens. He's looking to the heavenly throne where God sits enthroned above the earth. And look at what he says. God observes, verse 4, his eyes see and his eyelids test the children of men. That could mean two things. It could mean one is he sets tests for them to discern and to prove and to demonstrate whether they're genuine or not. So as a result of the test, the righteous are approved and the wicked are condemned. And that's true of what happens to us in our lives. They're, in a sense, they're tests that God gives to us. There's also a sense here, again in the context, there's a testing in advance of judgment. Testing in advance of God's condemnation and dealing with the wicked. So when we're in these times when the foundations are shaken, first of all look up and remember that God is still on the throne. Nothing takes him by surprise. Nothing is outside his control. Secondly, look ahead. Look forward. Look at verse 7. The Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. The upright shall behold his face. There's a contrast here between the fate of the wicked and the fate of the godly. For the wicked, there's going to be coals and fire and sulfur and a scorching wind. That's the portion of their cup, the cup of judgment. That's what waits them. For the godly, for the righteous, who are in a right relationship with God, because of our righteousness that God has given to us, demonstrated in our righteous deeds, the upright shall behold his face. In other words, here's the contrast. For the ungodly, they may seem to triumph, as we've seen in previous psalms. They may seem to flourish. They may seem to even win. They may seem to be victorious. But for them, there is nothing but damnation and judgment and condemnation and outer darkness. For the believer, for the godly, there may now be pain and instability and suffering and heartache. But for the future, for eternity, there is nothing but joy and looking into the face of the Savior. So we're to look up, God is still on the throne, and we're to look forward, because God has a reward for his people. Let me close by just telling you a little story. About 10 miles from where I live is a little town of Blackness on the coast of the River Forth. And there's a bleak old castle there, I've not yet been to, I confess. Sits out in the water almost. And it's an old fortress dating, I think, from about the 1500s, earlier than perhaps in the 1500s. And at that time, they used to put Christian, godly prisoners in there. People who are being persecuted for their faith. One such man was a man called John Welsh. in the late 1500s. He was there with others. And it was a dark, dark time. I'm told that in those days the conditions would have been worse than even the prison, the underground prison in Rome where Paul was held for a couple of years. And in the midst of this bleak, dark situation, in this little village of Blackness, that word is important, he received a message from a Christian lady who was a supporter and a prayer for the prisoners. And this is what she said: better to be in the darkness of blackness than in the blackness of darkness. You see that? Better to be in the darkness of blackness, because that's only temporary, painful as it is. Better to be in the darkness of blackness than to be in the blackness of darkness. If you're a believer, it's the darkness of the temporary blackness. If you're an unbeliever, it's the blackness of the eternal darkness. What a contrast. The Lord bless you.